It wasn't a Grand Prix, but it was, by all accounts, and I wasn't there either, but by all accounts, I mean, everybody who was there just remembers it as one of Stirling's classic days. It was Silverstone, it was May 61, and it was the first year of the 1.5 litre Formula One. And if you remember, the English, the Brits, were not happy at all about the new formula. And really regretted, the end of the 2.5 litre formula. But of course, all the 1960 Formula One cars were still around with their 2.5 litre engines. So if you remember, they briefly came up with this thing called the Intercontinental Formula. And in fact, there weren't many races run for them. I think there were maybe just 3 or 4, all in Britain. But in effect, they were running. It was like a 1960 Grand Prix, if you like, but without Ferrari. So Stirling was in Rob Walker's Cooper, and the weather was horrendous. I mean, it was one of those, there's rain and then days when the rain was really memorable. I mean, in current circumstances, today the race would never have started. Anyway, so they're still in Rob's Cooper, and he literally drove away, and I mean he was in another race, lapped everybody. Brabham was second in the factory Cooper, which actually was when, if you remember or not, Jack came out with this famous remark afterwards about so how was the race, Jack, and all the rest of it. He said, well, not too bad. Second's not too bad on a day like this. I'd feel worse if I'd been beaten by a human. So it was classic. It was the essence of Stirling Moss.
Given all of that, when the four-wheel drive Ferguson came along, this bizarre car, that Stirling embraced it immediately and saw the potential. He couldn't wait to get into it, actually, in the wet at Silverstone in 61.
Well, no, in fact, he what happened was that the British Grand Prix in 61, Rob entered his Lotus for Stirling, and also the Ferguson, which was driven by, started off anyway, by Jack Fairman. So, proceeding at a relatively leisurely pace. and Stirling, it was the year of Ferrari domination, and so Von Trips was in the lead in the Ferrari, and only Stirling was in the same race. I mean, Stirling was sort of hard after him. Couldn't catch him, couldn't beat him, but he could stay with him, and he was comfortable second ahead of the other Ferraris. And then, as it so often did, the Lotus broke. So that's not the end of the afternoon, boy, So they brought Fairman in, and then Stirling got in the Ferguson. And I wonder how many people actually have driven 2 makes of car in one Grand Prix.
Or gone from 2-wheel drive to 4-wheel drive.
Exactly, and from rear engine to front.
Yeah, well, there's one. Yes, exactly.
So it couldn't have been more different. And I think he finished the race, but I mean, by the time he took it over, it was laps behind. That was the only other time he drove it until the Gold Cup. And as far as I remember at the Gold Cup, I think there was some rain in practice. But if memory serves, I think the whole race was in the dry, and he won it. And actually, I remember talking to him about his favourite cars. They were looking back on his career, and of course, as always with Stirling, the 250F came first, in terms of just being a delight to drive, and the Merc for its just sheer efficiency. But then he mentioned the Ferguson, and he loved that car. He loved everything about it. What he always said was, the Cooper was much more fun to drive because you could do anything with it. And you you could get it at absurd angles and it would come back. And it was like almost in the same way that he loved the 250F. He always really enjoyed driving the Cooper. But he said the Lotus was never as much fun. It was because he said it was much more snappy. But on the other hand, when all was working well with it, it was on another level from the Cooper. So,
when did you first see Stirling drive yourself, Nigel?
At the Oulton Park Gold Cup in '54, and he was entered in his own 250F, but it was around that time that the factory had finally cottoned on to, well, he is actually considerably better than our factory drivers, so we really ought to. He had his private 250F that year, '54,
without Francis.
That's right. So it was around that time that. Al Francis was still working for him, but they did, after around that time of August '54, they did undertake to supply him with the latest car, and a factory car, and that was what he drove at Oulton. But of course, I mean, there was always, what was one of the reasons why I always loved Maserati so much. There was always a slightly shambolic quality about them, and it was Italian theatre at its best. And the Gold Cup, he started at the back for the simple reason that they hadn't arrived for practice. If you can imagine that. So on the Friday, the car wasn't there. The race was on the Saturday. The car, I think, arrived on the Friday evening. And so he didn't get any practice at all. I think he did sort of 2 or 3 laps on Saturday morning. I think they allowed him that. And he started from the back. And I think, as far as I remember, it was about lap 4 or 5 he was in the lead. I mean, just come through past everybody. The single sort of second moment I remember more clearly than any was when he came into Old Hall, having just taken the flag, having just won. Came into Old Hall and he was waving. And I remember at the exit of Old Hall, I don't know if he was showing off or just a bit too eager or whatever, but anyway, I remember got completely sideways at the exit of Old Hall, and never stopped waving with one arm, just checked it, one-handed, and gone the way down the avenue towards Cascade.